Shortly after releasing my first video, I realised that there was no way I could analyse the story of Merlin without first rewatching the entire thing. However, upon beginning my intense binge of the show, I slowly began to realise that perhaps it wasn't one actually meant for analysis, which, you know, was a great thing to become aware of after you've committed to a video series doing exactly that. What's important to acknowledge is that BBC's Merlin was made in a very different time. This was before streaming services, so episodes needed to be able to stand alone so that anyone could start watching and understand what was going on. When Merlin is seen for what it is, it's a really strong Monster of the Week show, but when seen through a contemporary lens, it doesn't necessarily hold up in certain areas. So at times it was a challenge to analyse, but not impossible. Okay, now that's out of the way, I'm going to jump right into things.
No young man, no matter how great, can know his destiny.
The job of the first episode of any show is to set up the premise and hook an audience. Merlin's first episode sets things up pretty clearly. We follow Merlin, who has been sent to Camelot by his mother to live under the care of Gaius, the court physician. Merlin has magic, but the use of it has been outlawed by the king, Uther Pendragon. Merlin's one job is to keep a low profile, but he struggles with this immensely, as he almost immediately picks a fight with the kingdom's bully, the prince Arthur. Merlin meets the great dragon, who explains that it's his destiny to protect Arthur, but Merlin's not here for it. And yet by the end of the episode, he saves Arthur's life and is made his servant as a reward. When we first meet Merlin, he has very little value for his own existence. He's a nobody. He puts too much value on his magic, claiming that if I can't use it, I may as well be dead. We see, however, that he's wrong. Magic isn't what makes him special. Audiences won't come back next week because of his magic. The CGI is way too shoddy for starters. No, the first episode ends with him saving Arthur's life. Though his magic assists, he physically runs towards the danger, proving his previous statement wrong. His magic isn't what makes him special, it's his natural instinct to do good. This leads us to the rest of the season, which is actually really solid. It's fun and campy, but it's the emotional beats that really give it strength. The scenes where the characters are allowed to slow down and just feel emotions, whether it's a father and son bonding or two friends messing with each other. These are the moments that make the show and kept people coming back. Merlin is a very active protagonist in the first season. It usually isn't him who sets the story into action, but he is eager to investigate and repeatedly sticks his neck out to help people, which is something we love about him at this point, but the dragon warns will be his downfall. Now, when rewatching season 1, it's odd to see that it's actually Merlin and Gaius' relationship that acts as the main focus, often paralleled with Uther and Arthur. Merlin is nothing if not a show about daddy issues. Like, seriously. Gaius is established as a paternal figure to Merlin from the first episode, though they're not immediately close. Merlin asks Gaius what he would do if his magic was discovered, and Gaius doesn't answer.
What would you do? Would you just make sure it doesn't happen for both our sakes?
It's clear they're not at a point where Gaius would risk his life for Merlin, but by the end of the season, that's exactly what he does. He gives his life to save Merlin. Despite this heroic act in the finale, I was struck by one singular thought while watching Gaius throughout the first season. He is a coward. Almost every episode is the same, where Merlin wants to help someone, Gaius tells him it's a bad idea and better to turn a blind eye. Merlin does it anyway, actually helps the person, but then apologises to Gaius. Season 1 is so interesting because the truth is, Merlin has infiltrated the castle of the villains. Almost every single bad guy in Season 1 is entirely sympathetic, or you can at least understand their motivation. The episode, A Remedy to Cure All Ills, perfectly encapsulates this. A sorcerer named Edwin attempts to usurp Gaius' position as court physician in order to get close enough to assassinate Uther. Gaius eventually recognises Edwin and reveals that Uther murdered Edwin's parents in the Great Purge, and that he barely escaped execution himself, all with a smile on his face. At this point, let Edwin get his revenge. Even Nimue, the big bad villain of the season, is sympathetic. Of course her actions aren't entirely moral, but it's easy to understand where she's coming from. She's a believable villain, not looking for world domination but for vengeance. Uther wanted a child through any means, so he turned to magic, knowing full well that in order to create a life, one would need to be taken. He just didn't anticipate that life being his wife's. He then turned on magic and Nimue, blamed them both for his choices, and we as the audience are supposed to sympathise with him?
Whoa, dead wife?
The first season sets up a world of grey morality. The finale has Merlin take Nimue's life to bring back Gaius, even though she never once lied to him about the Cup of Life. Unfortunately, this grey morality and nuanced villains aren't seen again after this season. But back to Gaius for a moment. He's so loyal to Uther, and we're never given a reason why, other than he's the king. After a certain point, after losing the love of your life, after watching hundreds of people burnt at the stake, after a certain amount of child murders, you would think that he might begin to reassess his loyalty. It's difficult to understand the motivation for stopping the villains other than Arthur's not ready to be king yet. Speaking of which, the show does an excellent job at conveying the immense pressure Arthur is under. Not only is he trying to prove himself worthy of being crowned prince, but he has a reputation to maintain as the best knight in Camelot. Uther is relentless in his expectations to the point where Arthur has a hard time believing that his father even cares about him.
I always thought that...
What?
Was it... I was a big disappointment to you.
Well, that is my fault and not yours.
The episodes Excalibur and La Morte d'Arthur are standout in proving this wrong and in humanising Uther. Arthur's character building is done very well in the first season. I do think he needed more moments with Nimue, but other than that, he's just arrogant enough with people like Morgana and Merlin, but is still honourable and caring enough that he manages to be likeable and feel like a real person. Morgana's role in the first season is voice of reason. I don't know if the writers forgot at the time that they were going to reveal Morgana and Arthur as brother and sister, but they don't acknowledge it, so we're not going to either. The penultimate episode, To Kill the King, gives us the first taste of Morgana as an enemy of Uther's. Uther executes Gwen's father and locks Morgana up after she argues with him about it, so she decides to assassinate him, and this first attempt on his life conveys a lot more about Morgana than it initially appears. She's shown in previous episodes that she acts on morality and encourages Arthur to do the same, but there's also an impulsivity to her. After a heart-to-heart with Uther, she changes her mind once more and lets him live. I'll talk about this more in later seasons, as this trait becomes much more prevalent in her when she becomes the villain. Ironically, it's a trait she's inherited from Uther, who one moment will sentence a man to death and then the next will admit fault just to commit genocide a week later. The pacing of the first season is fairly slow, but really picks up with some great episodes, such as Excalibur. It's a really strong episode that shows Arthur at his best. A wraith known as the Black Knight challenges Arthur to a fight to the death. Arthur desperately wants to accept, but the other knights keep stepping in to protect him. This infuriates him, not just because he wants to prove himself, but because he doesn't want anyone dying for him. After being unable to accept the challenge twice, he initiates his own challenge, which is just the ultimate power move. It's a fantastic episode in terms of tension building, and as I mentioned before, fits in thematically, drawing focus to Uther and Arthur's relationship. The episode also sets up the impending threat of Kilgara's release, and gives a peek into the anger he has. I have more to say on Kilgara in the Season 2 section. For now, I want to briefly mention Lancelot. He's a relatively simple character, he's honourable and desperately wishes to become a Knight of Camelot. His eponymous first episode establishes his bond with Merlin, as he is one of the few people who know about his magic, and is entirely accepting of it. It was important to lay the groundwork for this early on, as anyone who knew the legends beforehand would have known he becomes very important later on. Lancelot's actual personality is part of a bigger issue, and is something I'll discuss much later in the section I call The Knight Problem. It's time to properly discuss the final episode of the season, La Morte d'Arthur. It's a great finale with actual stakes. Arthur is poisoned by the questing beast, and Merlin has no way of curing him. Uther is distraught. Anthony Head was the perfect casting choice for Uther. He manages to make him so unlikable most of the time, but when necessary can break your heart and make you feel genuine sorrow. Merlin decides to go to the Isle of the Blessed. Nimue gives him water from the Cup of Life and at no point claims that it will be Merlin's life taken. She's never outright says it, but she's just ominous enough that he really should have gathered. Arthur is revived, but it's Merlin's mother who is now dying. Merlin plans to go back, but Gaius goes before he can and sacrifices himself. Merlin and Nimue have one of the worst fights I have ever seen, and Gaius is brought back after Merlin kills Nimue. This is a great episode because the theme of father and son is brought to a head, and because there's genuine tension. While we know Merlin isn't going to die, we know someone has to in order to save Arthur. The rules established with the Cup of Life are actually kept to as well. Gaius is only revived after Nimue is dead and balance is restored. Furthermore, when Merlin thinks he's going to die, he goes to say goodbye to Arthur, and it's a perfect display of where their friendship is at. There's some teasing, oh, how do you say this word? There's some teasing, a little standoffish. There's some teasing, a little standoffish. There's some teasing and a little standoff. Oh my god. Hello? How do you say this word? There's some teasing and a little standoffishness and a genuinity. It's a perfect summary of how much their friendship has grown and how much more it has left to go. Their relationship in the first season is interestingly paced. Despite Arthur's treatment at times, they become fast friends. The rapport between them is lots of fun, but their friendship moves a lot faster than I initially realised. They're willing to die for each other by the 4th episode. There's also this building pressure of Merlin wanting to tell Arthur the truth, but there's no reason to yet. If anything, he should have told Gwen. I think she would have initially been scared, but would have kept the secret. The thing is, everyone loves Merlin and Arthur's relationship, so not having a slow build isn't really a problem until we get to season 2.